the hidden genius in the hospital halls. The rain had been falling since dawn, soft but steady, washing the streets of Grayford City in silver reflections. Inside St. Augustine Memorial Hospital, the world moved in a rhythm of footsteps, elevator chimes, and the faint hum of machines that never slept. Among all the white coats and designer shoes that glided over the shining marble floor, only one pair squeaked, the worn soles of the woman who had cleaned those halls for 14 years. Her name was Elena Brooks, a widow in her early 40s, a woman whose hands carried the faint scent of bleach no matter how hard she scrubbed. People passed her every day, nurses with tablets in their hands, doctors lost in thought, families holding hope in plastic cups of cold coffee. Yet no one ever truly saw her. Elena had accepted that invisibility was a kind of armor. It allowed her to listen, it allowed her to survive, and it allowed her to keep her daughter close. Maya Brooks, the girl who spent every evening in the hospital waiting area, pretending to do homework while her curious eyes followed everything that happened around her. At 17, Maya looked nothing like the child of a janitor. Her natural curls were tied neatly in a bun, her brown skin glowing beneath the fluorescent lights, and her voice, when she finally spoke, carried a confidence that always made people pause. Teachers at school had called her gifted. Some said prodigy. But Maya's world had no scholarships, no mentors, no fancy labs. Her classroom was these hospital halls. Her textbooks were the medical journals patients left behind, and her experiments were the quiet thoughts that bloomed in her mind as she watched doctors rush past shouting words like toxin, sepsis, failure, code blue. That Thursday evening felt different from the others. The corridors buzzed with an unusual tension, a mix of fear and power that even Elena could feel through the smell of disinfectant. She overheard whispers from the nurses' station. Someone important had been admitted. When she pushed her cart down the private wing, she noticed men in dark suits standing by the door of room 706. They didn't look like bodyguards from movies. They looked worse, cold, trained, eyes scanning everything. On the door, the nameplate read, Luca Moretti, son of Dante Moretti, and that name alone was enough to make even seasoned doctors lower their voices. Dante Moretti was the silent ruler of half the city's underworld, a man whose wealth could buy silence and whose anger could bury it. His only child, 18-year-old Luca, had fallen ill 2 weeks earlier with a condition no specialist could diagnose. Elena didn't want to know details. She had learned long ago that curiosity was dangerous. But when she returned to the staff break room that night, she found Maya sitting by the vending machine with a thick medical book open on her lap. "You should be home, sweetheart," Elena said, trying to sound firm but failing to hide the tired affection in her voice. Maya looked up, her eyes bright with that same spark that always made Elena's heart ache, the spark of someone born for something more. "I was just reading, Mama. The doctors are all talking about the Moretti boy. I heard them mention neurological collapse without infection markers. That's rare, isn't it?" Elena sighed. "Maya, don't repeat their words. Those men don't like people talking about their family." But Maya's curiosity was like oxygen. She couldn't hold her breath for long. For days, Maya listened quietly from her corner seat in the waiting lounge. She noticed patterns others didn't. Which doctors came and went. What medications were sent upstairs, which alarms went off on the monitors in the corridor. She kept a small notebook hidden inside her bag, where she wrote down fragments of what she heard. Rapid neural decline, organ failure without cause, elevated adrenaline responses after medication. The doctors seemed desperate. Some flew in from overseas, others left shaking their heads. Whatever was killing Luca Moretti was invisible, an enemy that didn't show up on any scan or blood test. One evening, as the hospital clock neared midnight, Maya followed her mother into the janitor's storage room to help refill supplies. The air smelled of ammonia and tiredness. Elena leaned against the mop handle, rubbing her lower back. "You keep staring down those hallways like you see ghosts," she murmured. Maya hesitated, then said softly, "Maybe they're just blind to what's in front of them, Mama. What if it isn't disease at all? What if something's causing his brain to send wrong signals, like it's been tricked?" Elena frowned. "You've been reading too many journals again." But the girl shook her head. "No, think about it. If the organs are shutting down but nothing's physically wrong with them, then the problem isn't in the organs. It's in the control system, the brain, the nerves. It could be chemical, something synthetic, something they aren't testing for, Elena stared at her daughter, half amazed, half afraid. Maya's mind worked like a doctor's, but faster, freer, untouched by the boundaries of protocol. Still, Elena whispered, "Keep those thoughts in your head, baby. This isn't our world. People like us don't get to solve problems for men like Moretti." Maya nodded outwardly, but inside the thought had already taken root. A puzzle too big to ignore. The next morning, chaos erupted on the 7th floor. Nurses rushed from room to room. Someone shouted for the crash cart. Elena heard the noise from the elevator and froze. She didn't have to ask who it was. The Moretti boy had gone into cardiac shock again. Within minutes, specialists crowded the room. Cardiologists, neurologists, even a foreign toxicologist. They spoke in clipped tones that echoed through the corridor. Maya sat quietly by the window, pretending to read, but her heart pounded as she listened. "His vitals are collapsing," someone shouted. "Increase epinephrine infusion," another ordered. Maya's head jerked up. Epinephrine, adrenaline. She'd read that too much of it could worsen certain neural reactions if toxins were involved. Her pen shook as she scribbled a note. Adrenaline spikes cause brain misfires. She didn't know why, but something about it felt wrong. That evening, when the commotion finally quieted, she sneaked up to the observation window outside Luca's room. Through the glass she saw him, pale, motionless, his body connected to more machines than she could count. Beside him stood a man in an immaculate suit, silver hair, face carved from stone, Dante Moretti himself. The air around him seemed heavier, as if gravity bent to his grief. No one dared to speak in his presence. Even the senior doctor looked like he wished to disappear. Maya's breath caught when their eyes met through the glass for a fraction of a second. She looked away quickly, pretending to adjust her notebook. She didn't realize that tiny glance would change both of their lives. Later that night, Elena found her daughter sitting on the steps behind the hospital, the rain misting her face as she stared into the dark. "You can't stop thinking about him, can you?" Elena asked gently. Maya shook her head. "He's just a boy, Mama. Everyone sees a mafia heir, but I see a patient. He's dying and they don't even know why." "And what do you think you can do?" Elena's voice trembled between love and fear. Maya looked up, determination blazing. "See what they can't." 3 nights later, the hospital administrators gathered the remaining specialists in the boardroom. Dante Moretti had arrived with his lawyers and bodyguards. Rumor said he'd fired half the staff. Elena was mopping outside when the shouting started. A sharp male voice laced with fury. 100 doctors, and not one of you can tell me what's killing my son." The words slammed into the silence of the corridor. Maya, sitting nearby with her open notebook, froze. Then came the crash of glass against the wall. "Get out!" Dante roared. "All of you." Footsteps scattered. Doors slammed. When the corridor emptied, Maya stood there clutching her notebook, her heart pounding. She could feel the storm of his anger radiating from inside that room. For one terrifying moment, she almost turned away. But something stronger than fear pushed her forward. Compassion. Carefully, she placed her notes on a chair outside the room. She didn't know why. Maybe she hoped someone would read them. Then she walked away, her footsteps echoing faintly down the corridor. Minutes later, the door opened. Dante Moretti stepped out, eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights, and noticed the notebook. He would have ignored it if not for the scribbled line on the first page. "If the cause isn't medical, look for what mimics life but isn't alive. A chemical messenger disguised as healing." Something in that phrase stopped him. He flipped through a few pages, seeing neat handwriting, diagrams, notes about adrenaline interactions and neurotoxins. Then he saw the name at the bottom, Maya Brooks, age 17. The next morning, when Elena arrived for her shift, 2 suited men were waiting at the staff entrance. "Mr. Moretti wants to see you," one said. Fear ran through her veins like ice. She thought she was being punished, that somehow her daughter's curiosity had crossed a line. They led her to the private conference room where Dante sat, the notebook open in front of him. "Is this your daughter's?" he asked. Elena's mouth went dry. "Yes, sir." She didn't mean any trouble. "She's just a curious child." "Curious?" he interrupted softly. "This notebook reads like a medical report. Half my doctors couldn't articulate these observations. Your daughter wrote them in pencil." Elena could barely breathe. "Please, she's only a schoolgirl." Dante studied her for a long moment, then said, "Bring her to me tonight." That evening, as the sun bled gold over the skyline, Maya stood in front of the same man whose name made the city tremble. She expected cruelty, but what she saw was exhaustion, desperation, and something else. The fragile hope of a father clinging to the last thread of love he had left. "You think you know what's wrong with my son?" he said quietly. "Tell me." And for the first time in her life, Maya spoke not as a janitor's daughter, not as a child, but as the mind she truly was. She explained how certain synthetic compounds could imitate natural hormones, how adrenaline could amplify a hidden toxin, how Luca's body might be reacting to something unknown that no test could find. Every word she spoke came from pure observation, from patterns she had connected in silence. When she finished, the room was utterly still. Dante's eyes didn't show anger anymore, only a sharp, assessing light. "1 hour," he said finally. "You'll have 1 hour to prove your theory. If there's improvement, we continue. If not, you walk away and forget this ever happened." Maya nodded, her voice steady. "Yes, sir." That night, under the pale glow of monitors, she stood beside the dying boy while doctors watched with disbelief. She instructed them to pause the adrenaline compound. For 30 long minutes, nothing happened. Then slowly, Luca's neural patterns began to stabilize, his pulse evening out. Nurses gasped. The senior doctor whispered a prayer. And Dante Moretti, the man who had commanded armies of fear, felt his knees weaken as he whispered to no one. "Who are you, child?" Elena stood behind the glass window, tears streaking her face, pride and terror twisting inside her. Her daughter, the invisible girl from the waiting room, had done what 100 specialists could not. But as the monitor steadied and relief flooded the room, a shadow moved in the corridor, watching through the half-lit glass. A man in a gray coat holding a hospital ID that wasn't real. He looked at the screen showing Luca's improving vitals, then turned and walked away, pulling out a phone. His voice was calm and cold. "She's getting close," he said. "Handle it before the girl discovers where the toxin came from." The secret in her mother's past morning sunlight filtered weakly through the tall windows of St. Augustine Memorial Hospital, turning the once sterile white walls into a soft shade of amber. After the night of chaos and impossible recovery, the entire building seemed to hold its breath. Nurses whispered in the corridors, reporters hovered at the gates outside, and somewhere in the heart of the hospital, a miracle had quietly unfolded. The boy who had been dying, Luca Moretti, was alive, his vitals stable, his brain no longer spiraling into collapse. Some said it was luck. Others called it divine intervention. But Dante Moretti knew better. It had been the voice of a 17-year-old girl, a girl with eyes full of certainty, whose words had cut through years of medical arrogance like sunlight through fog. Inside the private ward, machines hummed softly. Luca lay still, pale but peaceful, his chest rising with rhythmic breaths that had eluded him for weeks. Dante stood by the bed, his expensive suit slightly creased for the first time in memory. His hand rested on the boy's arm, a rare tenderness breaking through the hardened shell of the city's most feared man. Behind him, 2 of his men stood in silence. Marco, his right-hand bodyguard, and Victor, the strategist who handled what Dante called the invisible side of business. Both men had watched their boss walk through wars and courtrooms without emotion. Yet now they saw a father fighting to understand something he could neither control nor threaten. "Find out who she is," Dante said finally, his voice low but steady. "Everything. Her school, her family, what she reads, who she talks to. If this girl saved my son, I owe her more than gratitude. But if this wasn't coincidence, I need to know why." Marco nodded silently, already tapping on his tablet. Victor hesitated. "Sir, she's just a kid. Maybe this is exactly what it looks like. Genius in the wrong place." Dante's eyes flickered toward him, sharp and unyielding. "There's no such thing as coincidence in my world. Check everything." Downstairs, Elena Brooks was scrubbing the marble lobby floor when she felt her phone buzz in her apron pocket. Her hands were wet, her heart already uneasy. The text was from an unknown number. "Meet me outside the hospital cafe in 15 minutes. It's about your daughter." Panic surged through her veins. For a moment she wanted to ignore it, to pretend it was a mistake, but something in her gut told her this was serious. She dried her hands, removed her gloves, and hurried toward the cafe. Outside, the air smelled of coffee and rain-soaked pavement. A man sat at one of the tables wearing a gray coat and reading a newspaper he wasn't actually looking at. When Elena approached, he folded it neatly and gestured for her to sit. "Mrs. Brooks," he said quietly, "you don't know me, but I used to work with you. Phoenix Solutions, Delaware, 2008, Elena froze. It was as if the world had tilted beneath her feet. That name, Phoenix Solutions, had not been spoken aloud in years. "Who are you?" she whispered. "My name doesn't matter," the man said, his voice calm but tense. "What matters is your daughter is in danger. You remember what happened the last time someone tried to expose the truth?" His eyes flicked toward the hospital entrance. "They're watching her already. You have to make her stop." Elena's breath came out shallow. "Stop what?" "Digging," he replied simply. "She's getting too close to the toxin's origin. If she finds out who made it, the same people who killed Dr. Mitchell will come for her, and this time they won't leave loose ends." Before Elena could respond, he stood up, leaving a folded piece of paper under her coffee cup. "This is my last warning," he said before walking away into the crowd. Trembling, Elena opened the paper. Inside was a list of names, scientists, investors, and at the bottom, underlined twice, Dante Moretti. The ink blurred as her tears fell on it. She understood now. The poison killing his son had roots in the same secret project she had fled from nearly 2 decades ago. The same project that had taken the life of her friend and mentor, Dr. Sarah Mitchell. Back upstairs, Maya sat in the observation room beside Nathan, the young intern doctor who had quietly become her ally. The monitors showed Luca's gradual recovery, but she wasn't celebrating. Her mind was restless, haunted by questions. "If my theory was right," she said, her fingers tapping the desk nervously, "then something artificial is still inside his system. The toxin isn't gone. We just stopped making it worse." Nathan nodded. "I agree. Whatever that compound is, it's dormant now, not neutralized. If it reactivates, he could relapse." "Then we need to find the antidote," Maya said firmly. Nathan looked at her with a mix of admiration and fear. "You talk like you've been doing this for 20 years. "Sometimes I feel like I have," she murmured. A soft knock on the door interrupted them. Dante stood there, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. "I need a word with you, Miss Brooks," he said. Nathan glanced nervously at Maya, then stood and excused himself. When the door closed, Dante stepped closer. "You said this was a synthetic toxin. You're certain?" Maya nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. Everything points to something engineered, not natural." "And could it have been introduced intentionally?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Maya hesitated. "You're asking if someone poisoned your son on purpose." "I'm asking," Dante said evenly, "if it's possible." "Yes," she admitted. "But it would require access. Someone who could reach him physically or through something he consumed. Food, medication, even air exposure. He's been under supervision for weeks," Dante said softly, almost to himself. "Only family, staff, and doctors have been near him." He turned to look at her. "You've done what no one else could. If you continue helping, you'll have everything you need, protection, equipment, whatever it takes." For a moment, Maya's heart lifted, not for the promise of wealth or fame, but for the chance to prove that intelligence and compassion mattered more than power. Yet she also saw the danger behind his words. Working with Dante Moretti meant stepping into a world where mistakes were punished in blood. Still, she said, "I'll help." That night, Elena returned home late, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the keys. Maya was waiting by the kitchen table, surrounded by notebooks, printouts, and half-empty mugs of tea. "Mama," she said excitedly, "Mr. Moretti's giving me access to the lab. We can finally run the full analysis. If we identify the compound, we can cure Luca." But Elena's face was pale. "You have to stop this, Maya. Right now." The sudden harshness in her voice made Maya freeze. "Stop, Mama, what are you talking about?" "I can help him." Elena slammed her hand on the table, her voice breaking. "You don't understand, child. This isn't about helping. It's about surviving. The poison killing that boy. It comes from the same project I worked on years ago. The same people who wanted me dead." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Maya stared at her mother, disbelief turning to shock. "You worked on this?" "Not by choice," Elena whispered. "I was a lab assistant at Phoenix Solutions. They told us we were developing treatments for brain disorders, but the real work was darker. Synthetic neurotoxins that could mimic diseases invisible to standard tests. When I found out, I tried to expose them. My supervisor, Dr. Mitchell, agreed with me. 2 days later, she died in a so-called accident. I ran, changed my name, became a cleaning lady just to disappear. Her voice trembled. I thought I buried that life forever. But now somehow it's come back. Maya felt the world closing in. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Everything suddenly made sense. The secrecy, the guarded look in her mother's eyes whenever science came up. Then you know how to stop it, Maya said, her voice trembling between fear and hope. Elena shook her head. I don't. They destroyed all the data. And whoever's using it now isn't doing it for research. They're using it for revenge. Outside, a car engine idled in the rain. A black sedan parked across the street, its headlights off. Inside, two men watched the apartment building. One spoke into a phone. She knows. Both of them. The girl's mother worked on the original project. A pause, then the reply crackled through the speaker. Handle it quietly. No police, no witnesses. The next morning, Maya returned to the hospital early, unaware of the storm gathering around her. Nathan met her in the lab, handing her a set of printed results. You were right, he said. The compound matches traces from a defunct research paper, Phoenix Solutions, 2009. A scientist named Dr. Sarah Mitchell led the project. The data's incomplete, but I found something else. He pointed to a list of corporate sponsors. Among them was one name that sent a chill down Maya's spine. Vitali Holdings, subsidiary of Moretti Enterprises. That's impossible, she whispered. Mr. Moretti's funding created the toxin that's now killing his son. Nathan looked grim. It's possible he doesn't even know. These shell companies are designed to hide true investors. But someone in his circle does. Someone who wants him destroyed. Maya stared at the document, her mind racing. If that's true, the person who poisoned Luca isn't just targeting the boy. They're targeting Dante Moretti himself. She looked up, eyes burning with determination. We have to tell him. Nathan hesitated.
Maya, if you tell him, he'll go after them his way.
People will die. If we stay silent, she said, so will Luca. By afternoon, the hospital felt heavy with unspoken tension. Security had doubled. Rumors of a possible poisoning had reached the staff, though no one dared to say it aloud. In his private office, Dante stared at a framed photo of his son, his jaw clenched. When Maya entered with the file in her hand, he turned slowly. You found something? Yes, she said, laying the papers on his desk. The compound came from a project called Phoenix Solutions. One of its investors was a company linked to your own holdings. Someone used your money to build the weapon that's now killing your son. For a long moment, Dante said nothing. The silence was suffocating. Then quietly, he whispered, Who? I don't know yet, Maya said. But I can find out. I just need access to old records, maybe the city archives or digital patents. Dante's face hardened. I'll get you whatever you need. But if you're right, whoever did this is inside my own empire. That means they already know about you. He leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. From this moment on, you don't go anywhere alone. My men will protect you. Do you understand? Maya nodded. But deep down, she knew protection from a man like Dante Moretti was a double-edged sword. She was safe from strangers, but bound to his world. That night, rain lashed against the hospital windows. Maya sat in the lab, scanning through old digital archives, tracing ghost trails of corporate mergers and hidden contracts. One file after another led to dead end, until one document flashed open. Project Seraphine, Neurochemical Weaponization Trial, Phoenix Solutions, 2009. At the bottom of the report was a name she recognized instantly, Elena Brooks. Her mother. Maya's breath caught. Before she could read further, the lights flickered, once, twice, and then went out. The hum of the machines died, leaving a silence so complete it made her ears ring. She turned toward the door just as a shadow moved outside the glass. A faint reflection caught the glint of metal. A gun. The night the lights went out, the power died so completely that for a heartbeat the hospital felt like the deep ocean. Pressure and silence and darkness wrapping everything tight enough to crush breath into prayer. And in that breath, Maya realized she was not alone in the lab. She didn't scream. She didn't move. She listened, because listening had always been her first language in these halls where invisibility taught survival. And what she heard first was the small sound people make when they think they're quiet. A coat whispering against a door frame. The soft shift of weight that tells you someone is preparing to step, and then the metal glint from the glass reflection slid higher, an arm raising, and the thought came to her as spare and sharp as a scalpel. Light is the difference between intention and aim. She ducked low behind the mass spectrometer cart, her shoulder clipping the steel just enough to make a hollow echo, and the echo did what echoes do. It told the intruder where she wasn't. He moved toward the sound while she moved the other way, palm finding the emergency drawer by memory, fingers skating over gauze and tape until they hit the heavy rectangle of a flashlight. She didn't switch it on. Instead, she tossed it blind across the room, and it clattered against tile with the hard certainty of a target. The muzzle flash blew a white flower in the dark, thunder punching the air where the flashlight had landed, and in that brutal strobe she saw him for the first time. Average height, gray coat, hospital badge that did not belong to any face she knew, a mask of calm laid over a job done too many times. The flash carved his cheekbones into angles, and then the dark swallowed him again. She dropped flat, felt the concrete through the thin knees of her scrubs, and crawled beneath the steel table where the centrifuge slept like a heavy animal, heart climbing into her throat. Not with panic, but with calculation. The fire suppression line ran above this room. She'd seen maintenance replace a valve last month when a leak stained the ceiling tile. Fire suppression meant sprinklers. Sprinklers meant water. Water meant a sensor that could be tricked by heat. Without light, she couldn't reach the wall switch labeled manual suppression. But heat could do what her hands could not. She pulled her phone from her pocket and, by touch alone, launched the little chemistry app she used for quick conversions. Not for the math this time, just for the backlight. She needed a flame. She had none. But she had friction and an alcohol wipe that would vaporize quick if she could spark it, and a cracked plug on the side of the old centrifuge that had chewed cords for years. She swallowed, slid the wipe into the metal tooth of the plug housing, yanked a cable free so its prongs scraped the aluminum lip, and prayed to the physics teachers who first told her that failures still warm the world. The scrape sparked. The wipe flared. Above her, a sensor blinked invisible. Decided there was a small false fire in a lab that shouldn't have one. And the ceiling hissed to life. 1,000 tiny throats drinking and then spilling, and the sprinklers came down with a silver roar. Water changed everything. It hammered the gunman's ears, muddied the small sounds he had been hunting, dragged his shoes into a chorus of squeaks, and, most importantly, tripped the emergency generator logic that didn't care about grid malaise or deliberate sabotage. Lights banged on in brutal sequence down the corridor. In the lab, they rose dimmer. Emergency strips along the baseboards like runway lights for the desperate. In that low glow, Maya saw the man again, his face bare now, eyes narrowed against the sudden rain, and he lifted the pistol for a cleaner shot. But she had already committed to the only path she trusted, movement with purpose. She rolled out, grabbed the heavy plastic bin of buffer solution, and threw. It did not need to be precise. It needed to be loud. It hit the stainless sink with a crash that sounded like glass exploding, and the gun swung toward the sound just as the door burst open, and with it a shape she had only learned to recognize this week. A man in a charcoal suit with the posture of a coiled spring, one of Dante Moretti's guards, Marco, water streaking his jaw, earpiece alive with clipped orders, hand already moving in a fast arc that ended with the gunman's wrist against the door jamb at an angle that made Bone remember it was fragile. The pistol skittered under a cabinet. A second figure shouldered in, Victor, colder, tidier, and together they made the violence small, controlled, exactly the right size to end a moment without growing it into a tragedy. "Clear!" Marco barked, and someone in the hallway repeated it down a chain. Maya's lungs remembered how to work. The logs began to talk just before 2 in the morning. Marco came back with a tablet wrapped in a zip bag because water had become a character in this story, and he had no intention of letting it write the next page. Facilities access shows a maintenance swipe at Euro 14 for the sub-level breaker cage, he said, voice stripped of everything but work. The badge belongs to a night shift tech named Alden Pierce. He was at home asleep. His badge was cloned last week. Procurement approved a rush order for solvent and IV pole wipes 15 days ago from a vendor called Pelion Clinical. Pelion is owned by an entity filed 4 months back with Morvell Capital as the funding parent. Deliveries were accepted by hospital receiving with a digital signature that belongs to no one. A generic login created a week before Luca was admitted. Nathan grimaced. So the poison rode in on good housekeeping. Marco nodded. And the man who aimed it tonight used a badge printed by the same machine that prints visitor passes for board members. He slid the tablet to Dante. And there is one more thing. Pellion's registered address is in the same building as the offices of Morvell. On the tenant list, one consulting suite is sublet by a firm that does risk advisory for logistics. The contact name on that sublease is Victor Albright. The name hung like a wire across a dark hallway. The door opened before anyone spoke, and Victor stepped back in, raincoat shedding a quick ring of drops on the tile. His face was a calm a reasonable man wears to a fire to remind others that some blazes can be walked around. "We have a short list," he said, and handed over a folded printout. Dante did not take it. "Pellion Clinical," Dante said, and it was not a question. Victor's eyes did not move. "A shell. Morvell money. Procurement signed the intake. The login is dirty, but dirty doesn't point a finger. We still have work to do." Marco's posture changed, the way dogs do when they smell the wolf in a story they thought was about foxes. "Your name is on the sublease," he said. "An old alias," Victor replied smoothly. "Used for a legitimate audit circle years ago before I worked for you." "It's not secret." "Your legal team has it in my background file." Dante's voice had no sharpness now, only an old, tired depth. "Why didn't you tell me when the hospital became our world that your shadow lived in the building, where the poison's mail is collected?" Victor did not flinch. "Because shadows are what I clean up for you," he said. "I didn't want you to mistake a broom for a blade." The line was good, too good, and it told Maya more than it told the men. Good lines are rehearsed. Truth trips. She left the men to their theater and bent over the molecule again. The chelation motif's geometry liked square planar arrangements. Copper sat there like a jewel in a crown, while calcium preferred different seats. If she could bias the bloodstream away from copper availability without starving enzymes that needed it, she could slacken the toxin's shoulders. She thought of food. She thought of Wilson's disease patients whose bodies carried too much copper, and the old careful medicine that coaxed the excess away. She thought of Luca's young liver, and how it would forgive almost anything if you asked kindly and quickly. "We don't hammer," she said to Nathan. "We whisper, microdoses, short half-life, titrated while we monitor neural patterns. Add a gentle calcium channel whisperer to soften the spikes and keep the heart from leaning on adrenaline. The goal isn't victory tonight. It's time." Nathan nodded, pulled doses from the formulary with the precise caution of a man who knew storytelling and physiology are both full of ways to hurt people you love if you rush the good parts. He typed orders, then stopped because he had no authority to type orders that mattered. He looked at Dante. "We need the attending to sign." Dante's mouth became a hard line that had signed wars. "Valdez," he said, and the syllables tasted like a debt he hated paying. Dr. Valdez arrived with the look of a man who had tried to sleep and failed because pride is a bed that fights back. He surveyed the lab, the puddles, the presence of a family he had never wanted to owe explanation, the girl whose voice had suddenly acquired the weight of a room full of monitors choosing to obey it. "This is irregular," he began, but irregular had already lost the night. Maya did not argue with his rank. She addressed his training and the part of him that had gone to medical school to play chess with death and win sometimes. She laid out the scaffold the way the toxin spoke to nerves, the way epinephrine had been a terrible chorus, the plan to hush rather than strangle, the dosages as tentative as a first step on new ice, the monitoring as relentless as sunrise. Valdez tried to find the arrogance he needed to swat a teenager's theory away, but what he found instead, to his surprise and to his credit, was the clinical beauty of a hypothesis that matched the data better than anything he had heard in 3 weeks. "If there is cardiac instability," he countered, half from duty, half from the old desire not to fail his oath, "we titrate. We have a net ready. We are not playing hero," Maya answered, and something in the steadiness of that sentence unhooked a knot behind his ribs. He signed. The pen left a tremor on the paper that had nothing to do with his hand, and everything to do with a man remembering that humility is not the enemy of authority. They moved like weather down the hall to Luca's room, a small storm of purposeful people. The boy's skin looked less like smoke now and more like someone had opened a window in his blood. The ventilator sighed. The EEG traced a conversation that had forgotten how to stay cruel. Elena stayed at the back because the back is where she had taught herself to be. But when they prepared the first microdose, she took one step forward and placed her palm against the glass. An old prayer in a new language, not for miracles but for margins. Maya stood at the bedside, spoke into the quiet not because the boy could hear but because human bodies sometimes respond to kindness, even when they cannot parse words. "We are going to slow the storm," she told him. "We are going to keep you safe while we find the right key. You do not have to be brave right now. You just have to rest." Nathan adjusted the drip. Valdez watched the monitor with the hunger of a scientist and the dread of a guardian. Dante did not breathe for 5 full seconds, then breathed as if oxygen had just been invented. Numbers have no reason to be kind, but sometimes they decide to be. The first adjustments did not crash the heart. The second did not shatter blood pressure. Neural spikes hesitated, then shortened, then learned a new rhythm that did not try to burn the brain's piano to make music louder. After 30 minutes, Valdez whispered something in Spanish that could have been anatomy or gratitude. After an hour, a different monitor gave a tiny chime as if confessing that it had always wanted to tell this story but had needed permission. Maya didn't smile. She allowed herself one long blink that felt like sleep's small cousin. "Time," she said softly. "We bought time." Back in the lab, the screen that had shown a molecule now showed a different kind of map. The audit trail Victor claimed he had coaxed from procurement's brittle system. Marco read it while trusting as little as possible. He traced delivery trucks, badge swipes, door opens, IP addresses. It wasn't one name. It was 3. A receiving clerk who needed a bonus to pretend he didn't see a carton get swapped, a facilities temp who wanted to turn probation into permanent, and a consultant with visitor access who shepherded both, timing the swap with a code somebody outside had written. The consultant's name wore a suit. Elias Gray, risk advisor. If you peeled the letters off slowly enough, beneath it you could still see an older paint. Albright Risk. It was an echo more than a proof, but echoes in this city rarely lied about the distance of the shout that made them. Dante looked at Victor as if he were a painting he had admired for years, and was only now noticing did not depict the thing it claimed. "If I ask you whether you knew the name Gray while you were circling the word risk in my life," he said, voice light as paper, "what do you say?" Victor held his gaze. "I say Gray was a contractor in a different lifetime, and that the world of shells is a hall of mirrors where everyone has the same face. I say I'm the reason your enemy's invoices never make it into your tax returns. I say I did not try to kill your son. It was not a denial of everything. It was a denial of the part that mattered most to a father. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes it is the most elegant form of guilt." Marco did not opine. He took 2 of their men and went to find Gray the way rivers go to find the sea. Direct, indifferent to obstacles. In the quiet that followed, Elena and Maya found a moment that did not belong to medicine or crime or history. They stood near the break room window where the rain had graduated from rage to rhythm. "When you were little, you would line up your crayons by wavelength," Elena said, a smile that hurt at the corners. "You'd tell me red was just a slower song of blue. I worried you would grow up in a world that only listened to drums." Maya leaned her head briefly against her mother's shoulder. "You gave me the quiet rooms," she said. "The ones where I could hear the notes underneath. I can't stop now, Mama. If I do, the people who wrote this poison will write the next verse on somebody else's child." Elena closed her eyes. "Then I will be loud for you when you need a drum, and I will be quiet for you when you need a place to hear." It was not permission. It was partnership. Near dawn, the analysis finally yielded the picture they needed. A predicted 3-dimensional confirmation of the toxin's binding face, the pocket it loved, the tiny ridge that made it choose copper like a dance partner who never stepped on toes. In that ridge, Maya saw an opportunity so small most eyes would have called it luck. A common safe compound, nothing exotic, could be coaxed, at a low, nearly homeopathic concentration, to occupy that same ridge if it were ferried in by a carrier molecule that would not get stuck where it didn't belong. The carrier was the trick. The hospital did not stock bespoke chaperones, but the pharmacy did stock something adjacent. A prodrug used in a different disease that split in blood to a shape that might, if asked politely, masquerade for 15 minutes as the escort they needed. 15 minutes could be an hour. If combined with the whispering blockers, could be a day if repeated in careful pulses, while the body did the ancient work of cleaning itself. It was not elegant. It was shepherding sheep through a wolf's forest by ringing bells at the right frequency. They wrote the protocol the way divers write notes underwater, slowly, legibly aware that ink and life both travel differently under pressure. Valdez signed again, His signature steadier now, not because courage had grown but because evidence had handed courage a cup of water. The pharmacy hesitated because pharmacies are built to hesitate when men in suits and girls with notebooks ask for unusual dances at 4 in the morning. Then it complied because fear and hope had been the hospital's twin administrators all night. When they returned to the room, dawn had begun to smudge the sky the pale color of paper before a story begins. Maya explained to the sleeping boy what they were doing because explanations are sometimes spells, and sometimes civics, and sometimes both. "We're going to give your nerves a decoy," she said. "The poison will think it's home. While it's busy loving the wrong thing, your body will do what bodies have done since time learned the word repair." The infusion started. Monitors negotiated. A line that had learned to stagger decided to walk in a straighter way. In the space between two machine beeps, Luca's fingers twitched. Not violently, not in the broken dancer's stutter of the toxin, but in the soft, exploratory way of muscles testing weather. Elena's hand jumped to her mouth. Dante reached his across the rail and did not dare to take his boy's hand because talismans are fragile, and some men protect hope by not touching it. Valdez looked at the EEG and said a single syllable that meant both data and grace. Nathan put a fist on the counter and pressed until knuckles went white, because he had learned that doctors sometimes need pain to believe relief. Maya felt the cold metal of the rail under her palm and let it anchor her because triumph is a bad captain if you let it steer the next hour. Marco called just after the second pulse. "We have Gray," he said, voice without decoration. He ran toward the river, then changed his mind and ran toward the lie that he was only doing a job. He has the kind of laptop that doesn't live alone. He has the kind of phone that believes in saints. He is very chatty when you trade him fear for the promise that he won't be the only one falling. He says Pelion is a doorway. The people behind it do not meet in rooms. They meet in balances. He has an email he will send to you now that he's remembered his password. Dante listened without answering, because answers had been too expensive lately. A minute later, Victor's phone pinged and he handed it to Dante. And on the screen there was a thread of messages whose politeness was the most chilling part. A meetup scheduled for the evening, a warehouse with a view of the river, a phrase in the body line that pretended to be about shipping containers and actually meant loyalty. "Bring the ledger." The sender was tagged with a name that decided not to waste any more aliases. It was not Victor's. It was the chief financial officer of Morvell Capital, a man Dante had shaken hands with while both of them wore tuxedos like armor. Underneath the CC line was a small note, looping in VA for redundancy. It could have meant anything. It meant enough. Morning came for real, not the polite gray but the honest gold, and the hospital remembered how to be a place where children are born, and elders are held, and middle-aged men in suits learn sometimes how to say "I was wrong." Luca's eyelids fluttered, then opened to a world he did not know had ever been complicated. He stared up at faces he didn't yet recognize. The doctor who had decided to be a student again, the young man with a name badge who looked like he hadn't slept, the beautiful woman in a cleaning uniform whose eyes held oceans, the girl with a calm voice who had spoken to him in dreams. He tried to speak and the ventilator did its practical scold, so he settled for the tiniest nod. And the tiniest nod was worth more than any speech. Dante stepped out of the room because fathers cry better where sons can't see. And in the corridor he found Maya and Elena and the strange sudden family a crisis makes. He did not make a promise. He made a statement whose weight would haunt the city for weeks. "You saved my son," he said to Maya and then to Elena, "and you taught me where to look for my enemies." He looked down the hall toward the elevators as if he could see through the floors to the river and beyond. "Tonight I will go to a meeting where people who think balance sheets are shields will learn that ledgers bleed. I do not ask your blessing because men like me do not deserve it. I ask for your patience. And I offer you something I have not offered anyone in a long time: choice. You can walk away right now, both of you, and I will make sure your names become ghosts, your door watched by men who never blink. Or you can keep walking with me to the end of this hallway, and into a day where a cure is not just our trick but the only song in the room. You owe me nothing." "I owe you everything. Decide." Maya did not look at her mother because their decision had been braided into their days years ago when Elena chose to sit with a girl in a library, instead of collapsing on a couch after double shifts. When Maya chose to learn the names of molecules the way other teenagers learned the names of bands. "We don't do half rescues," she said quietly. We built the bridge. We walk across. Elena lifted her chin, the small gesture that had once told employers who called her Rosa and Ruth in the same week that her name was her own. I will not let my daughter stand in front of your wars, she said. But I will not stand behind her either. I will stand with her, and I will stand with whatever is left of you when you decide whether you are a father first or a king. It was the kind of sentence that makes a man remember the version of himself that wore joy without needing pockets to hide it. They returned to the room, because the room mattered more than the river, and the day unspooled, and the protocol continued to be a lullaby instead of a siren. Reporters assembled outside like weather. The hospital administration drafted statements in which the word innovative did the work of the words we were wrong. Nathan called his mother and did not tell her anything specific. He told her he was tired but proud and that she should drink water. Dr. Valdez did a set of orders quietly that would ensure this kind of solvent would never enter his building again, and then he walked to a chapel he had not visited in months and sat without speaking the names of any saints, because sometimes sitting is the prayer. Marco sent one text to a sister who never asked what his job was. It was only a photo of the sunrise from the hospital garage, and she sent back a heart, and he put the phone away like a medal. In the late afternoon, when the light turned the city windows into coins, Lucas squeezed his father's hand. It was not strong, but it was a grip, and men have sworn vows for less. Dante leaned close, and in that bent posture the city would not have recognized him. I am here, he said, and the boy looked at him with a clear gaze that had never understood balance sheets and didn't need to. Maya adjusted the drip and watched the EEG write smaller storms, felt her bones relaxing 1 degree at a time, but she did not let relief draft the ending. She wrote notes instead. Finalize binding model. Confirm copper preference in vitro. Design stable decoy. Test in mouse neurons only if IRB says yes. Never cross a line just because someone powerful asks you to. Evening found them in the lab again, circling the molecule like sailors with a newly honest map. Elena sat on a stool and opened a box she had not opened since Delaware. A box wrapped in duct tape and will. The last artifacts of a life stolen by other people's ambition. Inside were photocopies of notes she and Sarah had made on napkins and margins, sketches of molecules with nicknames only they would have understood. One of the sketches matched the ridge Maya had found. Next to it, in Sarah's slanted hand, a phrase that made Elena's breath hitch. Decoys are kindness. She handed the page to her daughter with the care of someone passing down a family recipe. She wanted to quit, Elena said softly. She wanted to turn the lab into medicine for real. They would not let her finish what she started, but do it your way. The meeting by the river unfolded as meetings do when men in suits believe walls are armor. It is not our scene yet. What matters for this part of the story is that there were fewer men in the world after sunset, and more room for air to move around in a few offices where breath had been a bribe. What matters is that Marco came back before midnight, with a drive full of emails that made polite sentences into confessions, and ledgers that made numbers cry, and contracts that turned aliases into names you could put on indictments if you were the kind of person who believed in courts, or into calls if you were the kind of person who believed in storms. What matters is that Victor returned too. Face clean, suit uncreased, a story prepared about how bait works and how traps are set, and Dante listened and believed the parts that were convenient because belief is a tool as dangerous as any pistol. And because tomorrow was for reckoning and tonight was for a boy learning that sleep can be more than survival. Near midnight, they administered the final pulse for the day. The room was darker now, softer, the machines less intent on proving their usefulness. Luca's eyes opened again, clearer this time. He mouthed a word around the tube, and even without sound, his father read it because fathers learn lips before words. Home. Dante smiled with a kind of ache and shook his head once. The small no, that means yes later. Maya leaned in so the boy could see her. We're going to make the poison fall in love with the wrong shape, she explained as if talking to a friend at a kitchen table. And while it's busy loving the wrong thing, your body is going to walk it to the door. It will take days. That's okay. We have days now. His eyes flicked to her mother where she stood near the door, to Nathan, to Valdez, to Dante, and back to Maya. Then he blinked a thank you that did not need translation. When they finally stepped out, the hallway was almost empty, night staff moving in the quiet ballet of people who know how to carry other people's mornings. Dante stopped them there under a light that hummed like a distant beehive. There will be headlines, he said. Some will call you miracle. Some will call you trouble. I cannot control that. I can control this. A scholarship fund that does not ask for recommendation letters from men who play tennis with their neighbors. A lab that does not answer to money dressed as medicine. A door with your names on it that cannot be kicked in by anyone with an alias. If you want it, it is yours. If you don't say no, I will still protect you. Maya looked at Elena, and Elena looked at Maya, and in the glance you could see all the unglamorous nights of study and mopping and choosing hope over easier myths. Build the lab, Elena said. Make it a place where the janitor's kid doesn't need permission to ask the right question. Make it a place where we lock the right doors and leave the right ones open. Dante nodded. Done. He meant it. He did not yet know how much it would cost him. He would learn. They parted with the kind of fatigue that makes beds feel like absolution. In the stairwell, where the acoustics always turned whispers into choir practice, Elena took Maya's hand. You were not invisible tonight, she said. And you were not alone. Maya squeezed back. Neither were you. They walked down together, footsteps steady, the smell of rain lifting from their clothes like a blessing finally remembered by the sky. And on the 7th floor a boy slept through a night he was not supposed to see, and in a glass-walled office a man who had spent a lifetime mistaking fear for respect wrote 3 names on a piece of paper and then tore it up because sometimes power chooses mercy in the middle of a road that had not planned for it. And in a lab that had almost become a graveyard, a molecule sat sulking because it had fallen in love with a decoy, and a drawing made years ago by a woman who had paid with her life lay beside a new drawing made by a girl who planned to spend hers saving as many as she could. And if you listened very carefully, beneath the hum of the lights and the soft chant of monitors, you could hear the sound that cities make when the story they tell about themselves learns a better ending. The river of truth morning returned to the city wearing the color of old steel. The rain had stopped, leaving St. Augustine Memorial wrapped in a hush that felt earned rather than imposed, the hush of a place that had seen something extraordinary and was trying to remember how to behave normally again. Outside, news vans waited with their hungry antennas, but inside, silence ruled. The kind of silence hospitals love because it feels like control. In Dante Moretti's private ward, that control was a fragile thing. Luca Moretti slept with monitors tracing a steady rhythm, his body caught between exhaustion and renewal. At his bedside, Dante sat without his jacket, hair uncombed, the fatigue of 2 sleepless nights folding his power into something almost human. He held his son's hand as though it were the only contract that had ever mattered. Across the room, Maya Brooks stood with a clipboard of readings, her posture calm but her mind still racing through chemical equations and probability trees. She had become the gravity around which every conversation turned. Nathan kept close, translating her theories into medical language for Valdez, who no longer tried to hide that he was learning from her. Elena watched from the doorway, both proud and terrified, aware that her daughter was now living inside a storm that only geniuses attract. The previous night's chaos, the blackout, the attack, the revelation of Morville Capital, had carved invisible scars through everyone involved. Marco had returned at dawn from the river meeting, carrying a folder of photographs and a bruise under his jaw. The men who had tried to poison Luca were no longer free, but they were not the architects. They were errand boys of an empire that hid behind spreadsheets. Victor Albright had vanished after delivering a story too neat to be true, leaving Dante in the rare position of not knowing which of his soldiers to trust. The weight of that uncertainty pressed on him like gravity. He had built his power by reading men, by finding the lie in their first handshake. But this girl, this janitor's daughter, had done what his armies could not. She had stripped the poison from his bloodline and, without meaning to, from his soul. Watching her now, explaining to Valdez how the decoy molecule mimicked the toxin's curve, he saw something that frightened him more than any rival ever had. He saw integrity, and he knew how fragile that was in his world. Elena approached the bed quietly, laying a fresh blanket across Luca's feet. She spoke softly to Dante without looking at him. When he wakes fully, he'll need light food and gentle surroundings. No shouting, no talk of business. Her tone carried no fear, only authority born from caring too long for too many people who thought they were untouchable. Dante nodded as if receiving orders from a superior. He'll have peace in, he said, and for once he meant it. Yet peace was not ready to stay. Marco entered with his coat still damp and placed a sealed envelope on the table. "The ledger Gray mentioned," he said. "Emails, offshore records, signed directives. It names investors, but not all of them. One signature is redacted under legal privilege. I traced the digital origin. The metadata points back to a network node registered to Phoenix Solutions' successor company." Maya looked up. "Phoenix had a successor?" Marco nodded. "Different name, same skeleton. They called it Novogenics TheraCorp. Incorporated 3 years after Phoenix collapsed. Same patent portfolio, same board lawyer. And according to these documents, it still receives funding from the Morville network and from someone inside this hospital." The words landed like a tremor. Elena gripped the edge of the counter, her face tightening. "Inside this hospital?" Marco unfolded a photograph. It showed a man in a white coat, mid-50s, silver hair, familiar. "Dr. Calder Reeves," Marco said. "Head of clinical research. He approved the new supplier contract, the one that brought in Pelion Clinical's solvent." Valdez cursed under his breath. "Reeves has been here 20 years. He mentors half the staff." "And he was the one," Maya whispered, "who told me the toxicology results were clean." The silence that followed was not surprise. It was the slow realization of a truth people had been trying not to see. Dante rose from the chair, all calmness evaporating. "Where is he now?" Marco checked his phone. "Still in the building. He's giving a presentation in the East Conference wing, funding review for the research board." Dante's eyes darkened. "Then we go to church," he said, and started toward the door. Elena stepped in front of him, small but unmovable. "You can't drag him out in front of the board. Not here, not after what just happened. The police will smell blood and this hospital will drown in scandal." "Then give me another way," Dante said, his voice rough. Maya lifted her head, her mind already working faster than the words. "He'll have evidence on him, digital or chemical. If he was connected to Novogenics, he's not just funding. He's facilitating research. We find his trail, not his face. His pride will make him careless." Nathan understood immediately. The presentation. He'll be showing slides, probably from a personal laptop. If he's linked to them, the metadata will expose the connection. Maya turned to her mother. "You once said people reveal themselves by what they try to hide. Can you get us into the conference system?" Elena hesitated. "Only if I use my custodial access. It'll leave a record." Dante put a hand on her shoulder, surprising her with its gentleness. "Then I'll own the record." The East Wing Conference Hall was a cathedral of polished glass and quiet ambition. Rows of donors and administrators sat facing a massive screen where Dr. Reeves stood, speaking with the confidence of a man certain of his authority. His slides glowed with jargon: clinical trials, proprietary compounds, partnerships with unnamed biotech firms. From the back of the room, Maya and Nathan slipped through a side door into the control booth. Helena followed, clutching her ID badge like a shield. The computer controlling the display waited behind a security screen. Maya's fingers danced across the keyboard, bypassing layers meant to stop janitors from seeing what scientists saw. Lines of code flashed, and within seconds she was inside Reeves's presentation folder. The metadata spilled open: timestamps, upload sources, author signatures. One caught her eye immediately. Authored by Novogenics TheraCorp, Calder Reeves, Project Seraphine continuation. Her pulse raced. "He's still running the same project," she whispered. "Phoenix Solutions didn't die, it changed its name and moved into this hospital." Nathan looked at her screen, stunned. "Then your mother was right. The same toxin program, reborn here under our noses." On stage, Dr. Reeves clicked to the next slide, unaware that his world was unraveling in the booth behind him. "Our upcoming trials," he was saying, "represent the next frontier of neuroregenerative therapy. Targeted neural recalibration using synthetic analogs." The audience nodded politely, oblivious. Maya pressed a command key and the projector blinked. For a second, the slide vanished. Then, without warning, the true file appeared. A document labeled Seraphine Weaponization Data 09. Chemical structures filled the screen, diagrams annotated with military budget codes, dosage data labeled Field Application. Gasps rippled through the hall. Reeves froze, color draining from his face. "This is a mistake," he stammered, reaching for the keyboard. But the image remained, looping through pages of classified data until security guards stormed the stage. Chaos erupted. Reporters outside heard the commotion and began to swarm. Within minutes, the story of the miracle boy and the poisoned research funding collided into one explosive scandal. In the booth, Maya watched the room descend into panic, feeling neither victory nor fear, only the weight of truth finally surfacing. Elena touched her arm. "It's out now," she said. "No one can bury it again." Maya nodded, but her eyes lingered on the last line of the document, the signature that tied every horror together, approved by Executive Oversight, VA. She didn't need Marco's help to decode it. The initials were unmistakable. Victor Albright. The man who had sworn he was cleaning up shadows had been their author all along. By afternoon, the hospital was surrounded by flashing lights and angry questions. Dr. Reeves was escorted away in handcuffs, shouting about misunderstanding and sabotage. But Maya knew he was only a branch, not the root. Victor had disappeared, and Dante's men had fanned out across the city like a moving storm, following every wire that led from Morville Capital's accounts to Novogenics. In the midst of it all, Luca woke completely. He blinked at the light, confused but alive, and when his father took his hand, the boy smiled faintly. "I dreamed of rain," he murmured, "and a girl's voice." Dante looked at Maya across the room and said quietly, "You saved him." She shook her head. "No, sir. The truth did." Evening spread over the skyline, heavy with news helicopters and rumor. In a quiet corner of the hospital cafe, Maya and Elena sat together over untouched cups of tea. For the first time in years, Elena looked her daughter directly in the eyes without fear or apology. "When I ran from Phoenix," she said softly, "I thought hiding would keep you safe. But you were never meant to hide." Maya reached across the table, taking her mother's calloused hands. "You didn't run," she said. "You survived, and now we're both standing in the open." Nathan joined them, exhausted but smiling, a sheaf of printed data in his hands. "The compound levels are dropping. The decoy is holding. By morning his blood will be clear." Relief washed over Elena's face like sunlight after storm. Maya leaned back, finally breathing. "Then it's time," she said. "We're going to build the lab. Not for power. For people like him. For everyone invisible." Upstairs, Dante Moretti stood by the window of his son's room, watching the river cut its dark path through the city. Marco entered quietly, reporting that Victor's trail led to an airstrip outside the city and then vanished. Dante listened without turning. "He'll surface," he said. "Men like him always believe they can buy distance. What will you do when he does?" Marco asked. Dante looked at his sleeping son. "I'll decide whether vengeance or forgiveness looks more like love." The words surprised even him. For the first time in decades, he wasn't sure which answer he wanted. That night, as the city buzzed with scandal and the hospital glowed like a lantern above the river, Maya returned once more to the lab. The machines were quiet, the air cool. She sat alone before the monitor where the molecular model of the toxin still rotated slowly, a ghost reduced to geometry. Beside it, she placed the faded drawing her mother had kept from Sarah Mitchell's notebook, the one that said, "Decoys or kindness." She smiled faintly and whispered to the empty room, "You were right, Dr. Mitchell. The cure was never science alone. It was courage." Outside, dawn began its slow climb over Grayford City, washing the rooftops in light the color of forgiveness. And for the first time in a long while, no one in St. Augustine Memorial felt invisible.